Okay, we're going to continue on with our chapter 1 notes. So we are talking about the different ways in which your identity impacts, all the impacts on your identity. So again, the unit we just finished is all about historical globalization, how the movement of people affected everyone in the past. Now we're looking at how to resolve that issue in modern times, right? Particularly now, many of you, very few of you have probably traveled to different countries, but you're more connected than anyone in the past to the rest of the world, to a variety of different cultures, to a variety of different experiences. So how do you deal with that? Okay. Another way that people are, how they form their identity is through their relationship to the land. Particularly, we look at that because it's very important to, let's say, indigenous groups, the relationship they have to the land, the lifestyle that they are afforded of living with that connection or relationship to the land. How many of you have gone hunting? So how many of you eat some of the meat that you got from hunting? Okay, all right, so that is an aspect of your relationship to the land. For some people it's more important than other people. For those of you who haven't gone hunting, how many of you have helped your parents while you're grocery shopping? So that is your connection to your food. For other people, their connection to their food is through their relationship to the land. How many of you go camping at least like once every 2 years? Or go on like a hike, let's say, once every 2 years? Most of us, right? So for many of us, we spend our time indoors, probably with artificial lights. We are very fortunate that we have 3 massive windows, which allows enough sunlight in here that we can kind of see one another very easily. Although that might limit our ability to see the board. Okay. But for many of us, we probably live very sedentary indoor lifestyles using artificial lights. I was just listening to a video on this last night, which has can have tremendously negative impacts on our health, particularly our mood or your experience of depression and various mental disorders as well. Like over there, we have a child falling asleep in the middle of the day. Right? Not natural to fall asleep when the sun is out. Right? Unless for some reason you've been up all night. Maybe you were on a device. Okay, people in northern communities have very different styles of housing, transportation, what they do for entertainment. So where you are really dramatically changes your experience of the land. So for example, for us, now that it has started snowing and it's gotten cold, many of us are likely going to stay indoors frequently for the majority of the next few months. Does anyone do any skiing or snowboarding? A couple of us. Does anyone here play ice hockey outside every now and then? Right. Anyone else do any other activity outside other than walk to school or to your bus stop? Right. So for many of us, our relationship to the land is heavily connected to where we live and to the environment. And for us, we have 6 months of just darkness, cold, and winter and snow. It's terrible. It's truly awful. It's not conducive to life. Whereas, do you think people in California are nearly as impacted by the change of weather? Right? People who are closer to the equator, the center line of the earth, the climate, the tropical experience is very similar throughout the year, and so that's going to impact what they eat, how they act and behave, and all of that's going to have an impact on their identity. Ideological beliefs. This is something that you go into a lot more detail in Social 30, which is your grade 12 course. Ideological beliefs, they're beliefs about anything. So in grade 12 you go into more detail about gender roles of the government, anything that kind of affects society. It affects how you live. So it's basically your belief system. What do you believe about the world? Right? If you believe that people are intrinsically good, how are you going to treat them? If you think that people are intrinsically bad, do we understand what this word means, intrinsically?
No.
It's very similar to inherently, right? It's like by nature. If you believe that by nature people are good or bad, how do you think that'll impact the way you interact with them? Different cultures and religions can have different ideological belief systems. So I was explaining to a student the other day that under the Islamic belief system, there's a lot of segregation between men and women, right? So from my understanding, in an Islamic school, you wouldn't have integrated classrooms of boys and girls, right? It wouldn't really make sense. Some places might vary even within the scope of that religion. Your ideological belief, let's say as a Catholic or a Christian, might be that, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this story in the Bible of Adam and Eve eating from the forbidden tree, which many Catholic or Christian people believe that caused the first sin. And so there's this ideological belief that human beings are born in sin, that they need to be redeemed. How do they do that? By accepting Jesus in that faith, right? Historically, let's say in Western culture, they would have had different gender roles for men and women. Men would traditionally do what kind of work? Any ideas? Let's say you go back 50 to 100 years, what would men be expected to do?
Hard labor.
Doing hard labor. Some things never change. Military service, right? Anyone recognize this photo here? It's kind of hard to see. It might just look like a black and gray photo of a blur. Yeah, they're storming the beach on Normandy. Tell you what, there weren't any young women on those boats. Probably for a good reason. Okay? I don't know how many young women would have wanted to go and do that, right? Do you think they would have been allowed to? It's very unlikely, right? The roles of women and men were very different. What do you think some of the roles for women were 50 to 100 years ago?
The household.
Taking care of household things, right? Which could include, cleaning the house, taking care of the house, raising children, up until a certain age, until they could, do the hard labor as mentioned, potentially, right? You also mentioned like being a housewife, right? All of which is, difficult work. It's not easy, right? But again, there's different ideas of what men and women should do. Sometimes you can have conflicts with these cultural beliefs and religious beliefs. Okay, and as we studied in our historical unit, sometimes those differences can result in violence, right? They still do to this day. So sad part about this slide is, kids, I made this slide maybe in 2017, maybe 2018. Any of you recognize what these two words are?
Palestine.
Oh yeah, you can read them, but do you recognize the importance or relevance? Yes, what is the relevance? Yeah, there's a war right now. So sad part is, kids, 5 years ago there was also a conflict. It's very sad. So Israel and Palestine, the connection there is that part of their identity is their land where they live, but also their cultural beliefs and also a separation of religion, right? It's kind of a trifecta of different beliefs, and it leads to a lot of conflict, right? So for many Israeli people, many Palestinian people, they both feel as if they have a right to this land that there's a conflict over. Okay, how they'll resolve that issue varies greatly amongst different groups. There's also a religious difference. So Israeli people, typically they're the Jewish faith if they have a faith, and Palestinian people, if they have a faith, are that one's a little complicated because Arab Palestinians, Arabs of that region could be Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, right? Typically the conflict is viewed as as just Muslims, and I would say likely Hamas, if they practice a religion, is likely Islam, but we don't need to go too much on that. Most of you kids probably don't know about the USA invasion on Iraq. What year were you kids born? 2008. 2007, yeah. So, the Americans, why do you think in 2003 America would have invaded a country in the Middle East?
Oil.
Oil? If you've been paying attention. Why else? Why else? Significant reason. We thought it was a tradition yesterday. Come on, 2003. No, I feel like you know it. It's pretty obvious if you think about it. Why would America want to invade another country in 2003? 9/11, right? So some of the causes of 9/11, some people might say, are religious ideological beliefs, right? So in my social 30 class, there's like about a day and a half lecture of the build-up of how, Al Qaeda came to be through the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. Anyway, we don't need to go into all the details. But the U.S. invades Iraq. I want to say they invade. They were looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and I think they also invaded Afghanistan. And perhaps they had some issues with Iran as well, right? But again, they have a lot of issues on both ideological beliefs in terms of religion, in particular. Okay, we'll move on. So to have identity transfer over from generation to generation, it doesn't necessarily have to be done intentionally, but people will role model things. Okay. Does anyone understand what it means, like role modeling? What does this mean? Say that again.